This episode is sponsored by JDAQA Software Testing, your scalable solution for manual, automated, security, and performance testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show.
This is The First Customer, hosted by Jay Agnew.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. My name is Jay Agnew. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Ole Lensmar. He is the co-founder and CTO at Testkube, a Kubernetes native platform that powers continuous testing for today's AI accelerated development. How did I do, Ole? Was it good?
It was awesome. Very eloquently put.
Oh.
I love that description. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
It's almost like you wrote it.
It's almost. I'm
Ole,
sure I was involved at some point.
You might have been somewhere. All right, Ole, where are you from, and did that have any impact on you being an entrepreneur?
Long story. I've been living in Sweden for 40 years. I'm originally from Germany, I guess. I've grew up Germany in the US and then mostly in Sweden and another 2 years in the US. And maybe, and if that didn't have an impact, maybe the fact that I've moved around a lot and learned languages and been, required to adapt to new situations and find my way forward. And, maybe that has helped me, not like directly as an entrepreneur, but maybe there's kind of fostered traits that are helpful now being an entrepreneur.
It's a dumb American question, and you're going to have to play, Mr. Global, worldwide, knowledge here. But do you think that it's easier or harder to start a business in Europe in tech than in the United States?
It's definitely harder in Europe.
Okay.
At least from my experience, the appetite and risk appetite is very different in Europe and in Sweden, I guess. Maybe in Sweden is maybe a little bit more closer to the US, but I think it's still far from what you have in the US with this kind of mindset around investing into startups and ideas and people. I think there's just a totally different level of maturity and insight into how that whole process works in the US. I think Europe is still far behind, unfortunately. And I think that's why, you see all the big, obviously all the big, big companies, most of them are from the US. And I think and if they aren't from the US, that's where they usually end up, just like Klarna just listed in New York or NASDAQ, I guess. So that's where they end up.
So is it kind of a race to get to the United States market, like when you're creating a business over there?
Maybe not a race, but it's usually just maybe a natural progression that you start here with an idea and maybe you get some state-funded traction, or you find some early investors that have maybe a more believe in you or like willing to risk it with you. But I think if you want to raise the big money, it's usually you go over the pond because it's easier to find expertise and willingness and understanding of what you're doing and how you can fit into the world.
Was Testkube your first company?
No, I've done a bunch of startups actually since the mid 90s. First, like an internet startup in 96 that was acquired in 99. And then I started a testing software company, I created a tool called SoapUI, which is very, very popular for many, many years, an API testing tool, an open source tool that was also then commercialized. And then that was acquired by SmartBear. And that's when I joined SmartBear, like 2011. And then SmartBear, I helped grow that company. And that's also where I got to learn my other co-founder. I got to know my co-founder of Testkube, Dimitri, who's the CEO of the company.
I always tell people I do as much homework for these episodes as I did in high school, which is just enough to pass. So I didn't know that you were the founder of SoapUI.
Yes, that is my legacy.
Oh my God, talk about that is fantastic. And then I knew it got acquired by SmartBear. I know the SmartBear folks. We knew some of the same people just from being in the same sphere. That's very cool. So talk a little bit about why you started making testing tools. Like, why not development tools? Why not another product? What in QA kind of made you kind of go after that market?
I think SoapUI was a classic scratch your own itch thing. I was like an architect and an SOA project at a Swedish company, and we needed a testing tool to test our SOAP APIs, basically. And there was no such tool at the market, at least not free. I think the closest you could get at the time was maybe JMeter, which was not super easy to use. And then there were a bunch of commercial options like Mindreef and SoapScope, all these kind of tools. And then, so it was kind of a mix of that. There wasn't really an open source tool on the market. I was looking for a hobby project and I just love to code. So I think those kind of stars aligned. And so I built that tool mainly for our project. And then when we had it, I felt like, maybe this is something other people would enjoy. So we put it on SourceForge, which was the open source community at the time. Yeah, I guess it took off pretty quickly from there. I think there was a big demand for that kind of tool. There was really no competition.
Something that I talked to Todd over at Reflect and other tools creators in the QA space, I always wonder like who's buying this shit? Like the QA team doesn't normally have a budget, right? So it's a very interesting target to sell at. And I've always found the QA product world very interesting about like how you get to the people that have a budget and have the ability to spend money when you're solving a QA problem, although QA is usually a line item in the bigger
Mm.
budget. So it's not easy to get to. How did you, I guess, first of all, how did you kind of solve that problem, especially with Testkube and these other things we'll talk about? But how are you selling into a space where the main users of the platform, the main drivers, the main champions aren't typically the ones with the pocketbook?
So that's actually a super interesting question because my experience is, well, almost the opposite. So it's to say
Okay.
that selling to devs is a problem. And from SoapUI, we had a lot of developers using SoapUI, and they would never pay for the commercial option.
Mhm.
But QA teams were used to paying for tools from our experience. I mean, SoapUI was a very cheap tool compared to maybe a tool like Testkube. So it was usually, we felt that if we can get like a certain percentage of our users and QA teams, we knew that they were prepared to pay for their tools because there was a big market around commercial tooling for QA, for test management, and everything around testing. So that's really interesting that you say that, because that's kind of how we've always felt that, at least from my experience, is that QA people are more prepared to pay for tools than developers who think I can just build this myself, and I'm guilty of that, of course. So why would why would I pay $200 for something that I can build in 3 months? So it's like this,
Sure. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And I guess,
so,
yeah,
so
I guess
that,
I guess QA people can't do that. They don't have the option to go. Typically, aren't going to go build a tool themselves. So maybe
well,
that's
maybe now with shift, maybe it's an historic view. Maybe as testing has shifted left and become more of a maybe code centric or coding exercise, like you write your playwright tests and Cypress tests and whatever else in code. Maybe that has also changed. So maybe maybe I'm talking about how it was 10-15 years ago, and maybe that's no longer true today. But that's why, just to answer your question, we felt that, or historically at least felt that QA is a better market to sell to than developers, at least.
and it totally may be that you're coming at from the more accurate product perspective, and I'm more from the service perspective. I've been in the QA space and been a QA guy forever. So yeah, it's interesting coming from a guy who's sold a bunch of these products for me. You know better than I do who the target market is. We found some pushback or hesitance at that QA management layer because they didn't typically have like I said, the purse strings to make those decisions. They go back to the CTO. They would say, yeah, this is why we need this tool. They get the sign off, they get budget, and then they'd implement. So I'd love to hear new and different perspectives. So that's good. Right, so tell me about Testkube. Where did the idea come from? How did you spin it up? What was the problem you saw? And just kind of give me the genesis of the platform.
Sure. I think going back a little bit, I've always, like, if you go 5-10 years ago, I've always been a little bit frustrated with how testing was done in CI tools. If you look at Jenkins and others, well, maybe originally Jenkins and then as GitHub Actions, other testing was kind of always a third class citizen or a second class citizen. So it was, tests were buried in pipelines, and it was really hard to get an overview of kind of test results across all your pipelines. And having just for testers specifically, they were not very empowered in the context of CI/CD tooling. So the idea was really initially, can we just somehow break out the testing part of CI/CD into its own platform, which is more tester oriented, where testers can manage the testing part, the test execution part. They can work with results, they can troubleshoot. They don't have to go into, logs from Jenkins or GitHub Actions or whatever you might be using for CI/CD. It was more of a decoupling, and also from the need from what I guess from at SmartBear, people saying I want to run my test outside of CI/CD, and it was often very tied to your builds, right? If you want to run your integration tests, you have to run a pipeline, and that was not very empowering for testers and QA teams. They were kind of the submitting stuff to the ops team or the dev team, say, hey, could you add this test to the pipeline, and let's see how it goes. So I think that was kind of the idea, is to decouple testing from CI/CD, and then I think from there, and try to build a more test execution focused platform. And then when we started kind of being more serious about this idea, then also the question came up, okay, how are we going to run all these tests? And Kubernetes was kind of taking off at the time. So that seemed like a great platform, a generic platform. Everyone was Dockerizing all their tools. So let's say, why don't we just use Kubernetes as the engine to run any testing tool that can be Dockerized, and build a control plane on top of that, or whatever word you want to use, that then makes that available to your CI/CD tool, but also to other ways of running your tests, and other ways of interacting with your tests, and really more focusing for testers. I think that was the original idea, at least.
Do you have any idea of the footprint of Kubernetes, like just as a percentage of the overall kind of development market? Just curious, do you know like how many companies are using it out there?
I don't have any numbers. My gut feeling, it's still pretty low. I guess most companies many are dabbling or looking at it, but like using it in production, I would say I don't have any numbers, so I'm not going to say any numbers, but I think it's still low. But I know that adoption there's a big appetite to move towards Kubernetes and migrate to Kubernetes. But of course, in a large organization, that can take a lot of time, and it's not just a technical shift, but also a cultural shift, of course.
So who was the first customer? Who was the first customer of Testkube?
So the first customer, I'm not going to say the name, but it was actually, because Testkube was also originally, or still is, an open source product, was actually a support contract for the open source tool. So this was a European governmental organization that was adopting Testkube open source, and they wanted to have some features in there that weren't, but also needed to have, like, from a legal perspective, a support contract. So that was kind of the first commercial customer. And then the first customer of the commercial tool, to be honest, I don't remember exactly who that was. It was not that long ago. I have a couple of names in my head, but I don't remember exactly. But it was also, as far as I remember, a US insurance company that was kind of really a sweet spot for where we think Testkube is at. A company that's both adopting Kubernetes, that has a legacy stack with Jenkins, etc., and is just realizing we're running all these tests all over the place. We don't have really one place where we can manage our testing. It's all buried in pipelines, and we need to surface that and have a more standardized way how we do testing as we go into cloud native.
I love that. Now, how's that changed since you started? I know you said it hasn't been a long time. Has there been a shift in the ICP that you guys are going after? Have you learned some stuff as you've gone along, and maybe you're targeting companies differently? Like we know who your first customer was. How does that compare to who your customers are going after today?
No, I think that's actually maybe one of the bigger things that didn't go as we thought, is that we were kind of coming from SmartBear, which was a tools provider for the individuals, right? So we were hoping for maybe something like SoapUI, right? So people buy with a credit card, and it's a very automated process. But Testkube is more of an enterprise sales product. It's something that large corporations adopt to really standardize on how they do testing in their cloud native infrastructure and architectures. So I think that's really where most of the value of the product is there, right? So for a startup with 10 people that's running some, Postman tests in GitHub Actions, probably not. You don't need Testkube at that point. But like I said earlier, if you have 2 or 3 CI/CD tools, which is pretty common nowadays, you have both Jenkins and you have GitHub Actions or GitLab, and then you're doing Flex or Argo for GitOps, and then you're running all these kind of different tests. And now that you're provisioning infrastructure, thanks to Kubernetes, you're dynamically creating clusters. Maybe you have a platform engineering team. So you also need to look at how do we validate the infrastructure, not just the applications running in the infrastructure. And you're doing different types of testing across the entire like life cycle of the products or software that you're building, and you just like to get that into one place instead of having, there's some tests running in GitLab and there's some things being triggered by Argo and there's something over here. It just gets very fragmented, and I think that's once again where Testkube really comes in to kind of pull all that together into one place, and then built on Kubernetes, which gives it a lot of strengths around how it works with GitOps and other things that people are adopting today.
Curious about the open source model. Why do you like that route? What, is it altruistic from a, giving something back perspective? And then just just for those who don't know, including myself, is this, I've heard that the support path is typically the way to monetize the open source model. Is that how you guys, and I know you have kind of the commercial, do you still have two flavors of it? Do you have like an open source and then a commercial grade? Like what is the open source kind of setup? Why did you do it? Just talk a little bit more about what your thoughts are on open source.
I think the open source is a way for us to validate the idea, I guess, is to get something out there to engage with initial users and hopefully get them to contribute. It's not always possible, but it feels like a very low touch and a bottom up way to get into a space that's an engineering software savvy or a heavy space, I think. And what the plan was, and this is kind of what we've done with SoapUI and also many of the products that SmartBear, Swagger specifically, that I was very involved in, was to have like a basic or an open source offering that people can use as a standalone thing. It has to definitely have its value on its own. Totally fine with having a big open source user base that is not, monetized. I think they're great. It brings us feedback into the product, into the direction, and also gives us a footprint in the space, which I think is super important. And then on top of that, building in a commercial offering that caters to those enterprise ICPs that we talked about, where they are definitely willing to, they see the value in those added commercial features, and they're willing to pay for them.
How do you sell into the enterprise? It's a nightmare. It's a long sales cycle. There's a million people to talk to. There's so much politics. It's just like, we stick with kind of, larger SMB into like mid-market kind of space, just because you can still get some human beings along the way and interactions. How do you sell into the enterprise space and keep your sanity?
I think from what we see is that we still land initially with ops teams, interestingly, for Testkube. And so who are maybe the ones, if you look at that ICP that we talked about, they're the ones tasked with building up this new infrastructure or cloud native platform, and testing is a part of that. And they're kind of scratching their head or seeing the opportunity or looking for a way to can maybe overhaul and centralize. How do we do testing? And I think we have a lot of the messaging that we have and the material that we produce is geared at those problems that they stumble into initially. It could be very tool centric, right? People who try to run K6 tests in Kubernetes or other tools that we kind of support. So I think that's kind of how we land, and then we try to, very early talk to them and do demos and try to really get them to see how the bigger picture of Testkube, because as I said, maybe they initially just see it as an efficient way to run K6 tests, and we're like, well, actually it can do much more than that. So it's important for us to have an early interaction with those engineers that discover us, and then usually we land with like one department in a large organization, and then we grow into the organization from there.
Have you had a lot of success scaling horizontally through those orgs?
It's too early to say a lot of success,
Okay.
but that's definitely what we see, that we are scaling horizontally into the orgs where we have where we get an initial footprint.
All right. In 5 years or 10 years, if everything goes perfect, where is Testkube in the next 5 to 10 years? What is the vision of the product? If everything that you guys have planned and you want to do comes to fruition, what is it going to be in 5 to 10 years?
I think Testkube today is very focused on test execution. If you look at the software testing lifecycle, one of those lifecycle things, I think we can go far beyond that and broaden both into like the areas of test management or managing testing environments. These are things people ask us about a lot. So kind of are spreading across the entire software testing lifecycle and either integrating with tools or building our own functionality. So we'd like to be like a one-stop shop for your testing needs when it comes to like cloud native infrastructures applications. We don't plan to compete with testing tools per se. So we're not going to create our own load testing tool or end-to-end testing tool. I think there's a very healthy and great ecosystem of tools out there. But I think tying those together in a way that is more caters to cloud native ways of building and delivering software. I think if you look at a lot of the vendors on the space I wouldn't say they're like stuck in waterfall, but they are tools that were created 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I feel there's definitely an opportunity for us to go into that space. And also now with AI, it's obviously something that I think is not just a buzzword. It's also something that we have to relate to both in the product and with our people adopting AI, how we can help them from a testing perspective. And that's also something that we want to, cater to.
You mentioned not competing with tools companies. Are there other competitors that are doing what you're doing right now?
There are definitely the competitors that we have a couple of competitors. One is the CI/CD tools where people say, well, I can just run my tests in GitHub Actions. That's an easier argument for us because those are not built for testing ultimately, and they have shortcomings when it comes to running tests at scale and maybe some of the things I outlined earlier. The others are the cloud execution vendors like BrowserStack, Sauce Labs, Lambda Tests, BlazeMeter. These are tools that were kind of arrived when people didn't have their own infrastructure for running tests, and there was a need to like BrowserStack run across multiple browsers, multiple devices. I think today with Kubernetes, that the need to pay for that infrastructure is not there anymore. People have very capable Kubernetes gives people a very capable infrastructure to run tests at scale. Also, the need to run across multiple browsers, etc., is something that you can do very well now with Playwright in Kubernetes. So it's really the only area where we kind of today fall short is like iOS device testing. So if people need to run stuff on an Apple device, for example, but even Android devices can be simulated now in Kubernetes, something that we can do with Testkube. So we can do quite a lot that you would previously have to outsource to a cloud vendor, which then in our case, since we don't charge for usage, right? So you can run as many tests as you want and as much as you want in parallel to your infrastructure, so you can use it as you want. And the models that you see the cloud vendors using are very geared to how many tests you can run at a time or in parallel, et cetera, et cetera. And all that goes away. It's a big advantage for us.
All right. Final question. It all makes sense. This was great. I hope we can stay pals and do 50 of these shows because there's so many things that I want to ask you that I always run out of time. So I have one final question, non-business related, non-Testkube related, company related, etc., just about Ole. If you could do anything on earth and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would it be?
If I could do anything on earth and I knew it wouldn't fail, I'd do a jazz guitar set at the Village Vanguard in New York.
I mean, you can't fail. So that's yours. That's a first. I've never heard of jazz music, anything. That's fantastic. All right. Well, I love that answer. All right. Well, if people want to reach out to you directly to hear something they heard today, how do they do that? And then how do they find out more about Testkube if they want to do that as well? Reach out to me on LinkedIn or just ole@testkube.io or just go to our website, testkube.io, sign up to our Slack channel, GitHub. You can find us in a bunch of Testkube related places. Testkube related places. All right, Ole, you're awesome. Thank you for Likewise. All the work you've done in the community. I think I'm still blowing my mind that you were the founder of SoapUI. I did not know that. So this is great. I feel like I may have known that at some point. It just blew my mind back then so much that I forgot to. But thank you for everything you've done. Keep up the good work. I love the team you've built so far. And I've been interacting with those guys. I firmly believe great leaders and great founders build great teams, and it feels like you've done that. So congratulations on that. Keep up the great work. We wish you nothing but success, and we'll follow your story along the way. Thanks for being on today. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Thanks so much, Jay, for having me. Thanks, Ole. See ya.